Banking is an emotive subject these days because the banks have not done us any favours. The global financial crisis is a result of the banks experimenting with our money, right? And so it's like, where is this going to go? It's interesting, actually, that if we look at the business of banking here in the United States, if we look globally, only 30% of the world's population has a bank account. Did you know that? That's 70% of the world doesn't have a bank account. In the United States, 1/5 of American households are what we consider underbanked. So unbanked is you don't have a bank account. Underbanked could be that maybe you have a debit card, but you don't have a traditional checking account. And what we're seeing today, that this group of underbanked, even here in the United States, representing 20% of the population, that's 40 to 60 million people. This group of people, half of them have college degrees. Half of this group that doesn't opt into the banking system has a college degree. And 25% of them, not 25 of them, 25% of them have a prime credit rating. So why is it that these individuals who theoretically would be attractive to the banking system aren't now being a part of the banking system? Is it because banks suck? Well, maybe. Right? Maybe that's part of it. I asked my daughter this question the other day. She's 11. And I asked her this question. And it's a very simple question. And this is actually at the heart of this shift here. I said to her, your best friend, her friend lives overseas. Her friend is Tia. I said to her, how would you send your friend Tia some money if you wanted to send her some money? My daughter's name is Hannah. She thought about it and she said, well, Dad, I'd probably SMS it to her or email it to her. And now that is the way that kids these days think about communications. That's their modality. That's the way that we interact. We interact digitally these days. In fact, YGen and digital natives aren't even using email as much because they use texting and they use Facebook to communicate instead of email these days. So to my daughter, this was the most logical thing. So I said to her, well, here's a proposition, Hannah. What about if I get a piece of paper for you and you write Tia's name on it? Then you write the amount of money that you were going to give her, and you send her that piece of paper in the mail, and then she can take it to a bank at the other end and get some money. And she said, don't be silly, Daddy. No one would ever do that. Now, this is a check, right? So when we go to sell someone a banking account today, we say, come and get a checkbook. And we say, hang on a second. Does that make a lot of sense in today's economy? This is M-Pesa in Kenya. Now in Kenya, there's 4 big banks. The oldest bank in Kenya is about 105 years old, the Bank of Kenya. Between the big 4 banks, they have 3.5 million customers. But the bulk of the Kenyan population doesn't live in the banking system. About 4 years ago, M-Pesa, which is a product produced by Safaricom, the telecommunications company, M-Pesa came along as a way to transfer money using your mobile phone. Pesa is the Swahili word for money, so it means mobile money. So you take 2,000 Kenyan shillings, you go along to an M-Pesa outlet somewhere in Kenya, you put 2,000 shillings over the counter, and your friend receives an SMS to their mobile phone saying, you have received 2,000 shillings. They can then take their phone to another M-Pesa outlet somewhere in Kenya and withdraw the money. Sounds a lot like a debit card, doesn't it? Right? Or a bank account. In fact, now what you can do is you can take your phone along to an ATM machine in Kenya, and you can put in your phone number into the ATM machine, you receive a PIN number to your phone, you then use that PIN number and you can withdraw cash out of your phone from the ATM. Pretty amazing. So here we are today in the United States. If I'm in Kenya, I can send money by SMS, and I can't do it in the United States. I have to use a check. Is there something wrong with this picture? This is why the banking system's changing. Now, why did I put this slide up? Well, let me tell you. In India today, there are more mobile phones than toilets. And very soon, in places like China, this is going to be the case. So if you want to include people in the banking system, how do you do it? Well, you don't use paper that can be flushed down the toilet. You use a mobile phone. because this is what people have access to, and it makes it simpler for us to interact. It makes it simpler for us to pay. You think, well, what about security? What about all of these issues? Well, actually, it turns out that this is far more secure than a piece of paper or a piece of plastic, because we have a number of things that are going on in this mobile phone. First of all, we have a number of security mechanisms built into the phone. And I don't know about you, but when I get out of a cab, the first thing I do is I look in the back of the seat and I check if I've left my phone on the chair, because I'm paranoid about this. This is my life. So it makes sense that we start to think about this in a different way in terms of modality. But there's other things happening here. This is the stock chart for Apple computers over the last few years. They've now had 10 billion downloads through the iTunes store. They've had massive growth. People are camping out, waiting to get their iPad 2. Right? When people walk out of the store with their new iPad, they're holding it up, they're taking photographs, they're telling their friends about it. This is just really exciting stuff, So Apple doesn't have customers. Some people say Apple has fans. Now you think about this, sort of this relationship that Apple's building with their customers, and you think about the banking environment. When was the last time you saw someone camping outside of their bank? What's the difference here? But there's a modality shift. See, who would have thought 5 years ago, if I told you the second largest book publisher in the United States, or the book distributor in the United States would be Apple, you'd say I was crazy. If I told you the largest music reseller in the United States would be Apple, you'd say I was on drugs. But that's what it is today, due to this shift in modality around mobile devices. But it's not just Apple. Facebook. Look at the massive growth that's occurring in social media today. Is this a surprise to us? Well, no. This changes the way we interact. But it's not new behaviour. We've always had social circles. We've always had friends. We've always gathered and talked about things. We've now just enabled this in a new way with technology. And then we have things like Groupon and Foursquare. Have you checked in today using Foursquare? If you don't know what I mean, then go and have a look, see what it means. Groupon recently turned down an offer from Google to purchase them. Guess how much it was? $6.2 billion. They said no. Why? Because Google, Foursquare, Apple, all of these companies have worked out that this is the future of interactions. This is where things are going to go. But the banks haven't quite worked that out yet. Because the first thing that you do, if you're a bank, when a customer walks in and says, I'd like to open a bank account, you give them a book full of pieces of paper. Wouldn't it be better to give them a mobile phone? That would make a lot more sense. Right? So where is this going to go? Well, let's think about this shift. Bank of America, when they launched mobile banking, the mobile banking app, they were extremely successful. They were the first bank in America to launch mobile banking through the iPhone. And within just a very short period of time, they had over 6 million customers using this app. And you think to yourself, well, this must be pretty cool. In fact, 250,000 customers joined Bank of America just to get access to mobile banking. That's pretty cool. 100,000 customers a day today use this feature. You might say to yourself, they must have a pretty cool banking app. Well, actually, if you look at the iTunes store, it's rated 1.5 stars out of 5. Let me translate. That's not very good. But you know what the trick is here? People will use a really bad app to do their banking as a preference to not using mobile banking. Because we want it, we're on the move. We're on the move, we need to pay a bill, we're sitting on the train or we're sitting in the car, we're sitting in commuter traffic, and we're like, oh, I forgot to pay my landlord. Bang, bang, bang on the phone. Oh, did my salary check come through yet? Did that payment come through? We want to do this on the move. In fact, we can take our phone today and we can book a ticket for an airline on our phone. Then we can download the boarding pass to our phone, and then we can go to the airline and we can use our phone as the boarding pass. And we can't get our account balance? Come on, something's wrong with this picture. So the use of the mobile phone has raised our expectations. And we expect to be able to do this type of basic banking through the phone. But there's other forces happening here. So Borders recently has suffered. Why? Well, there's been a shift in modality, hasn't there? There's been a change. We take physical books and we're now reading them on our Kindle or our iPad. You think, well, Barnes & Noble, they're still around. Why is Borders now bankrupt? A very interesting thing that happened back in the dot-com. When dot-com was booming and Amazon was taking off, Borders actually had a website, borders.com, where they sold books through it. And they didn't think it was going to make any money, so they sold it to Amazon. That's why Borders is bankrupt today, because they don't have an alternative revenue stream through the online channel. But there's other businesses that have suffered with this modality shift as well. Blockbuster. Blockbuster's out of business today. Why? Because now we're downloading our movies. We don't need to go and buy a physical piece of plastic to stick it in our DVD machine anymore. We can download it straight. This modality shift is occurring all around us. So when we think about it, when we look at things like newspapers, there was a time we could never imagine that newspapers would not exist. But this time is soon upon us. Now, will newspapers not exist, or will they just shift in modality? Will they now just go from being physical broadsheets to something we read on our iPad? This is an interesting question. Let's have a think about this modality shift. Books have shifted from paper to Kindle, or from paper to iBooks, or ebooks, or iPad versions. And we have newspapers have shifted from paper to digital. But you know, part of the shift that's occurred here is now, if you look at YGen and digital natives, 60% of kids today get their news from Facebook. Do you know the number 2 news source in the United States? Number 1 is still New York Times. Do you know the number 2? Huffington Post. It's not a newspaper, it's a blog post. The number 3 source is the Jon Stewart Daily Show. It's true. Then CNN. And I can't tell you where Fox is, but... So now we're not reading actually news stories like we used to on a whole newspaper. We're picking out the stuff that we want to read. We're curating it. This is being filtered. So what's going to happen to checks? Well, checks are gone. It's just a matter of time. So, you know, we're going to take our phone and we're going to bump our phone to each other. If I owe you $50, I put $50 into my phone, I touch my phone to your phone, I just paid you. Your phone acted like a POS terminal, my phone acted like a credit card. No big deal. Why would we carry plastic around when we can use our phone to do the same thing? I asked a bunch of bankers this last week when I was in London presenting at a payments conference, and they said, we don't get what the big deal is with this. Because, you know, it's just plastic versus the phone. What's the big deal? But the big deal is that I can tell you what your account balance is here. And that's a very useful piece of information when you're thinking about using a credit card or a debit card at a transaction. That piece of information is actually the number 1 piece of information that people request when they ring up their bank. That's the number 1 call to call centers in banks in America. What's my account balance? So if you combine that on the phone to help you do the transaction, that's a very useful piece of information. But if you think about, well, why are we replacing plastic? It works fine. Why are we replacing the checks? They've worked fine for years. You're missing the point. It's change of modality. So have a look at this. This is Square. You heard of Jack Dorsey? He's one of the founders of Twitter. He worked out there was 30 million businesses in the United States that didn't have access to credit cards. And he created this capability where you just stick a little plastic thing in the top of your iPhone, you download an app, and bang, you can go. This is now a terminal that accepts credit card payments. This is useful innovation. But why do we even need to have plastic? Have a look at this video. This is a simulation of the use of the new iPhone in a Visa payment scenario in the New York subway. Pretty easy, huh? Just take your phone, hold it up against a reader. Pretty easy. So if you think about that, that transaction using your mobile phone to make that payment takes about 6 seconds to fire up the app and hold it up against a reader like that. To take your physical credit card out takes about 9 seconds. To do the same transaction with cash can take anywhere from 15 to 30 seconds. So why would we use our phone? It's actually faster. But have a look at this simulation. This is done. This is a real live payment done in Starbucks a couple of weeks ago.
Mobile payment in Starbucks.
Have a look at how this works.
I'll have a cappuccino with 1 pump of hazelnut.
A frappuccino?
Cappuccino with 1 pump of hazelnut. Grande.
Now you know my Starbucks order. So she puts it in the machine.
$7.84.
Okay, so we're going to fire up the app. This is the Starbucks app on the iPhone. See, Mike's got some credit there.
Okay, the barcode reader. Very simple.
Need your receipt?
No thanks.
Okay.
You see a discount
That's
for
it,
using
done.
the iPhone.
And then we go back to the app.
Now watch what happens to the balance of
That's a
the
really
card.
weird number.
Yep, with a really weird number. And as it updates that. There we go, it's updated the transaction.
Your balance is updated. The power of that information embedded in that transaction is extremely powerful. So why wouldn't we use a check anymore? This is a far more superior mechanism for doing this. So in the future, when we take our phone and we're looking at doing a transaction like this, buying a car, then it's going to be phone to phone. Why would we take a check, write a person's name on it, give that to the person, then they drive down the branch and they find a parking spot and they wait in line for 15 minutes and then they hand it over the counter just for a small processing fee? Why would we do that when we can do it with our mobile phone? See, that's the driver. It's behaviour. It's modality. It's not we get attached to these physical things, but unfortunately, as part of this modality shift, the way we interact changes. Now, we don't really trust banks these days. This is actually on a corner in Hong Kong. We're protesting the Lehman Brothers fallout and what happened with some of the mini bonds there. But this feeling for banks is pretty common these days, right? But the problem is that banks, not only are they the way they try and do things, they think of innovation as new ways to screw customers over with fees, right? Let's hide these fees. What's happening at the moment is more and more people are opting out of the banking system because they don't have to be involved in the banking system. So the question would be in the future, who's actually going to be the bank? If your phone is your credit card, who owns the bank account? Is it Apple on the iTunes store? Is it Google? Or is it your bank? Well, it doesn't have to be your bank anymore. This is really interesting. And what we're seeing emerge as a result of these new thinkings is lots of different ways of banking. So a gap is opening up here. A gap between the banks and customers and the way customers behave. And we're seeing some amazing innovations occur in this space. And the young people sitting in this audience today, they don't get banking the way it used to be. They think differently about these interactions. So in the future, it's very likely that the banks are just going to be there at the back end. They are going to own the pipes and the wires and the networks. And we're going to have some very, very different interactions at the front end around our mobile phone and around other types of interactions that we would never have thought of before. But it's going to be, there's one thing about it, why it's going to work. It's going to be simpler. And that's the key driver that we've got here. So that's the Bank 2.0 message. Thank you very much for your time.